everyone, and we're back. We're going to be extending our session from before, where we're specifically looking at South Africa, talking about fraud, financial crime of all types, and we're going to be now looking at telecoms fraud in general. So there's some huge research gone into the area, and crime across telecoms and fraud is worth approximately $40 billion a year, which is absolutely huge. We've talked a lot about MEF events, about the value, for example, of the application to person SMS market globally, A2P SMS market globally, and that is worth 30 billion. So fraud as a whole across telecoms is worth considerably more than that. So we're going to be getting into the discussion with some real experts who are going to be giving us a true global flavor. And I'd like to start off by introducing Mr. Tim Ward from XConnect to start off with as my first speaker.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, everybody.
Hello, Tim. Introduce yourself, please. XConnect, what you do and where you operate.
Why, thanks very much. Yes, we're very much a global company. We are part of Somos, who are a US company, but probably kind of internationally better known for our XConnect brand, where we've been serving particularly the A2P marketplace, but growing more in a big way into the carrier space as well. And our main business is as an information provider. And we refer to everything we do as number information services. So it kind of gives it away. That's exactly what we do, number information services.
So that's it, global and number information services, and numbers are so important, whether it's routing voice calls, SMS, and a whole range of other topics, of course, as well, mobile subscriber intelligence numbers. So, yeah, perfect. You've got a checkbox, you're here. Next up, I'd like to introduce Dmitry Sumin. Hi, Dmitry.
Yes, hello, nice to see you.
Hey, good to see you. So, yeah, fantastic seeing you, having you as part of the discussion here. AB Handshake was indeed part of mFilterIt's business messaging in Amsterdam as well. And that was the first time that you'd come into the MEF community from a speaker perspective. So nice seeing you a second time here, AB Handshake. Could you introduce yourself and what your company does?
Yes, certainly. I work as a head of product for AB Handshake, and the company is providing a wide range of anti-fraud services to the operators. Of course, our key technology being the AB Handshake calling validation solution, which allows the operators to validate calls between each other in real time, making sure that any call they send or receive is legitimate.
Fantastic. So that's voice calling, and AB Handshake was involved on a panel looking at the whole area of voice and voice fraud as well at the event. So fantastic having you with us. Next up, I'd like to introduce Nina Kumar, who is VP with mFilterIt.
Hi, James. Good afternoon.
Hello. Where are you, and what's your company, and who are you? What's your background? What do you do? The whole lot.
Oh, thanks, James, for inviting us over for this session today. So we are based out of India, and mFilterIt is part of the larger 60 technologies. And between us and the parent group, we are there in almost 75 plus countries, serving close to 160, 170 clients, telcos and enterprises alike. And in terms of what we do, so we are typically, mFilterIt is a typically fraud detection and mitigation organization. And the unique part about mFilterIt is that we do it across the user lifecycle. So right from the pre-acquisition, which could be digital fraud, to the onboarding, which could be identity theft, to the transaction level fraud, which is there, and then the post-transaction, which is chargeback. So we do it all along the way.
Fantastic. So throughout the whole life cycle and global. So great having you on board. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our last speaker joining this panel is Katia Gonzalez Gutierrez, who is head of fraud and security with BICS, but you also have a role within the ITW Global Leaders Forum, and actually look forward to talking to you and indeed your colleagues later in the week as part of our cross-industry partnership, which we have with you and the GLF. So Katia, take it away. What do you do at BICS and your role?
Well, hello, everybody, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this session. It's a real pleasure. So I'm heading the fraud and security activities at BICS. BICS is global communications platform. So our activities range from voice to roaming to SMS. So any kind of communications enabling activity, well, this is what we take care of. And it's global. So as you're mentioning, for everybody. So yeah, we deal with different actors across the globe. Obviously, one of our main concerns is fraud protection for our customers, security protection, making sure that we can provide the services that we provide in the right manner. So yeah, we're looking at this with a lot of attention and a lot of focus. So I'll be happy to share whatever we can.
Fantastic. And thank you all for joining me and MEF here at mFilterIt Digital Transformation. Now, Winston Churchill was the first on record, shall I say. I'm sure there have been many various variations over time, but he was the first to go on record saying, "You never let a good crisis go to waste." And unfortunately, what happened with COVID and the various, often fractured, inconsistent reactions to COVID and how to stem the spread of COVID created what has clearly been, given the increase in telecoms fraud over the past several years, an increase in fraud, and created a hotbed of opportunity. So I'd just like to start with a general question to you all. I'm not usually a fan of these general questions to everyone, but very, very simply start with Tim. 1 to 10, 1 being an absolute disaster, 10 being we're superheroes, we can end this live discussion immediately. How are we collectively as an industry? So we think about all the various companies present here, mobile network operators and other stakeholders. How are we doing at stemming this huge tide of telecoms fraud? And hopefully plugging it 1 to 10.
As usual, I never answer a straight question with a straight answer. I'll split it into 2 bits. But I think when it comes to awareness and effort, I think we're actually doing a pretty good job. I've seen that really grow in terms of the carriers taking responsibility, the end users being educated, the business players taking responsibility as well. And that's probably 6 or 7. However, I think the real challenge is you've got to look at those stats, the stats that you kind of look at for how much fraud and the growth in that fraud. And it's difficult to give better than like a 2 or 3. It feels like the fraudsters are moving quicker than we as an industry are. And that's not a good position to be in. We need to get ahead of them.
Okay, thank you. Dmitry, the same question to you. I don't know if you want to split it out into the 2 ways Tim did. Not a bad idea, perhaps, but go for it.
No, actually, I would like to say that it's more like a 5. And that actually correlates with the figures you have mentioned. I think it's somewhere in the same survey, there's the figure that actually around 50% of the operators are currently using really up-to-date tools and really have automated procedures in place. So they're kind of ready to stop complicated fraud attacks. So it's roughly 50-50. However, I think I will give it a 6 just because we really see a lot of positive trends recently. And we think that the industry on the whole is moving in the right direction. So 5 to 6, I should say.
Okay, there we are. A bit more positive there. Moving to Nilay, yourself.
Yeah, James. So I think I'll probably go with what Tim started. I think it's easier to split it into 2 parts. One is the acceptance, the awareness, the knowledge, and the other would be the intent, if I may put it that way. So my numbers would probably be a little, in fact, diagrammatically opposite to what Tim says. I believe in terms of awareness and acceptance, we are probably 3 or 4. In terms of intent, we are probably 6 or 7. And the reason why I probably put it this way is that if you look at even the acceptance part, it's still coming in. Okay? So the latest what is happening on the acceptance is probably, I think the best example would be Mr. Elon Musk, right? The whole Twitter deal of $44 billion has gone bust, where he's called out, the fact that Twitter does not have 4 to 5% fake accounts, but at least 20%, north of 20%. Now, that is something that has been well known, and we've been talking about it for a very long time. But that acceptance and that awareness is still not been there. You look at another aspect, which is, let's say, OTPs. Now, OTPs, we've all known that they can be hacked, they can be forwarded, they can be, there is so much that can be done with them. But, that awareness is still kind of missing. Now, in terms of the intention, if you see all the telcos, there are various initiatives which the telcos and the regulatory have taken up to kind of stem the fraud. And I think that's why probably I give it a 6 or 7, in terms of the intent.
Okay, thank you. And Katia, yourself, there are multiple hats you could wear. You could wear personally, you could wear BICS, you could wear GLF.
Yeah. I would say overall, I would keep it on a 5. And the reason for this is that both on the intent and on the awareness and the actual protection that we are performing as an industry, well, the world is not equal. In some regions, we are outperforming others in some aspects, but in general, I think because there's so much difference across the regions, that creates really heterogeneity that is very easily exploitable by fraudsters. I think I would keep us on a 5. We need to do this effort of, growing at, a more coherent piece, across the globe. Otherwise, it's a little bit of a pity.
Okay. Tim, let's get to it. We've seen an increase in fraud across telecoms, and there wouldn't be that increase unless there was something rather attractive and juicy about the world of telecoms. What's changed in the past couple of years about telecoms? Where has the extra demand for our services come from? And what areas or key areas of fraud are there out there?
I think, some of it is kind of very straightforward. We've all seen, as you said in your introduction, there's been a move to remote commerce. We're all buying things online, we're buying things over the phone. And both of those situations mean you don't actually see the other person at the other end. You don't necessarily hear their voice. You're not quite sure who they are that you're talking to because you found them through a search engine. And I think this period over the last 2 to 3 years has caused an incredible increase. I can also look at that in a slightly negative way, in that there's a whole load of shops that have closed. I go to my local town, I can't go to the bank anymore. There isn't one. And I can't, I'm buying everything on Amazon or so. So whatever happens, that means that do you know who you're talking to and do they know who you are has gone away. Because I used to go in my bank and my bank manager, oddly enough, actually did recognize me. And that's kind of gone. So that move away from face-to-face is a big thing. And unfortunately, the other side of it, which I think is really what's happened, is it is too easy. People have actually had the time to take a look at some of the technologies and the way information is being used and the behaviors, and have recognized that as soon as you take away that personal touch and it becomes an impersonal transaction, you now only really know very little about the person that you're actually doing business with. Maybe you don't want to do business with, but you know so little about them. You've got so few clues to use that it has become too easy for the fraudsters to get away with absolute murder. And I think those are the 2 key areas. When it comes to sort of what types of fraud you're looking at, again, I tend to sort of put these in particular categories. One is where the carriers themselves are actually losing direct revenue. Someone has done something bad that has directly, basically stolen their money. I think you've got another one, which is much more difficult to put your finger on, which is about losing trust, where the end user is losing trust in the carrier or the service provider or whatever means of communication it is. And now the revenue hit is indirect. It's now the fact that I didn't answer my phone on Friday night when I got a call because my phone came up and it showed a caller ID I didn't recognize. And I just made that decision instantly. I wasn't going to answer it. It actually turned out it was quite an important call. And I went away and I searched through my emails and I found that caller ID. And I thought, actually, I do know who that person is. It's just they weren't in my directory. But it actually got marked by my phone company as spam. So I didn't answer it, and I took the wrong. Now, that's also my lack of trust. I don't want to be talking to someone on a Friday evening.
We're going to come back to that, and that's to do with technology and information and false positives. False positives actually can be more of a danger to this industry than actual fraud itself in many ways.
You know, I think the last point in this is almost that factor that telecoms has become like a toolkit. It's become like a fraudster's toolkit. They can do some dreadful things with caller IDs and delivery addresses and utilizing information that they have about the way networks work. And they've learned this information and they're getting better at using it. So I think those are kind of some of the characteristics which have increased this world of fraud. Sorry to hit on so many things. I'm not leaving anything for anyone else, but I bet you'll find out.
Let me move on. You actually opened the door very nicely talking about voice calls and everything. And I can resonate strongly with what you were saying personally there.
Yeah.
But Dmitry, AB Handshake, the voice side of things. Can you just talk about some principal types of voice fraud you're seeing in the market? And what about the actual profile of a fraudster today? Are they more sophisticated than they used to be?
Yeah, sure. So I think actually what we the topic we brought up earlier. So yes, we can examine how, let's say, COVID changed things in the area of fraud. But I think the problem is broader than that. Any change that happens affects all players on the market. And of course, well, let's say fraudsters are a smaller business as compared to an operator, and therefore they can adapt quicker. So any change will ultimately play into their hands unless there's kind of a decisive tool that can block them out. So I think that's exactly what's happening right now, is that, yes, we do see, well, let's say fraud isn't changing that much. So all the voice fraud types that were out there 10 years ago, they are still out there. They are, however, there are new types emerging, obviously, and they do differ from region to region. I think also that when we speak about different regions, we shall not even exclude the regions which we traditionally think as more safe ones, because yes, of course, let's say somewhere in the developing markets, the networks are kind of smaller. They may be not so stuffed with technology, but on the other hand, sometimes they are newer, and in this way they are more easy to monitor because they don't have the legacy segments in them. So in some cases, they are better protected actually. So yes, and actually what you see, of course, now is that fraud is becoming more complicated in terms that, okay, so we're speaking about voice fraud, but that's not strictly voice fraud, because, for example, there can be malware involved that generates voice calls on behalf of the subscriber, and that's voice fraud plus malware problems, like cybersecurity and things like that. So it's really kind of it's becoming more technologically advanced, and of course the operators need to keep up.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So we've had people who had moved into telecoms, who are very sophisticated fraudsters, cyber criminals in plain language, who are seeing huge opportunities. Nilay, moving to yourself, your mFilterIt, it's a global company. Can you just give us an idea of, are there different types of fraud you're seeing more in specific areas, or can you just bring any particular light on any particular types of fraud that you're seeing in particular countries or regions?
Yeah, sure, James. So in fact, okay, talking about the areas of fraud, as I said, we see the fraud and the associated leakages for telcos right from the pre-acquisition stage. So if I may just put it very logically, you look at the pre-acquisition, you talk of digital media. That's the first way that a telco communicates to a prospective customer. You work whether you're working with Google or Facebook, whether with walled gardens, Twitters, or whether you're working with partners and affiliates. The fraud extent could be as high as 15 to 20% to almost 70%. We have actually seen, and worked with aggregators in telcos where the clicks that were coming in, and I'm talking of carrier billing here probably, the kind of traffic that they're buying from partners and all, 98% of those clicks are generated by bots. 98%. So that is the kind of numbers that we're talking about. And Google continues to say that there is 2%, 3%, 4%. And the highest that we have seen on the digital part itself is close to 23%. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part comes in when you talk of typically a customer downloading a mobile app, and you talk of the registration process or the onboarding. So things like your identity theft, account takeovers, customer data getting stolen, that's another huge cohort, that people are struggling to deal with. The third one typically would come in terms of the transaction level fraud. So there you have cases, I think in your previous session, Ansel was talking about iframing, where a customer has not even seen a particular website, but a subscription has been raised. So there are things like iframing, there are things like spoofing, spoofing the header. So I, as a fraudster, spoof the header and you pay for it while I consume the service. So all these kind of frauds are happening on the transaction level part. And then, very disconcertingly, if you see, when you talk about $40 billion of telecom fraud, almost $6 billion of that is coming from chargeback, which could be either a friendly, chargeback, or a illegitimate kind of a chargeback, where a fraudster has kind of used somebody's credit card and paid for a service. And the question that you raised, James, which is very important, telecoms today, the telcos today are becoming a magnet for fraud. And the reason is that they are becoming large e-commerce enterprises. There is so much of e-commerce that is happening with telcos today that is unbelievable. And to add to it is the fact that the kind of data that they hold, which is about the customers, their, the entire customer profiling. So data profiling, the customer profiling is a huge vertical business in itself. So imagine a fraudster getting into the ecosystem and being able to steal the data in terms of the age on network, in terms of the ARPU, in terms of all the kind of stuff. He can sell it to a third party, and there'll be billions of dollars lying on the table, for this.
Exactly. So it's like FICO do for their mobile subscriber intelligence, like we had Scott before.
Absolutely.
From FICO, but the illegal side of things, and there have been plenty of examples about that in the past year or two. So thanks for that.
True.
Katia, coming to yourself and carrying on the conversation. What about yourself at BICS? Nilay mentioned the chargeback side of things, and I know international revenue share fraud is likewise a $6 billion industry alone. What are the key things you are seeing at BICS and indeed amongst other GLF members?
Indeed, it's a business. It's an industry by itself. Actually, all fraud. It's a real industry, and there are a lot of means that are deployed for this. As some of the participants mentioned, they are much more reactive, much more agile than us in the industry we are. And they take advantage on it. So we have seen specifically for IRSF, there's, even if it's a very old fraud scheme, it's still very, very damageable for the whole industry. And there's been really an evolution to it. Like there has been an evolution to most of the fraud in general, but specifically to IRSF, for the past, 20 years, we've seen it mainly affecting the voice services. Right now, it's really extending to the SMS services in the very same way. So they haven't really done much to change it. Just they are changing the service itself, and in a very basic manner. So people will receive SMSs with click on this link or call this number. And it's very basic, but people still fall for it. So, and that will take us, I guess, later on to the education.
Yeah, so an example. So no, just a real life practical example, because there are going to be many viewers out there that aren't familiar with the fraud. So you're encouraged to dial back or respond with an SMS, and it's a premium rate. It could be charged several euros, several dollars a minute. And it also links into PBX, so private branch exchange hacking, in plain language, hacking the phone system of offices. And that's a real popular one. It's still around. And imagine if you get into the phone system of one of your local companies and you're able to make practically unlimited calls. So you dial up a known premium rate number, of which you are getting a nice revenue share for hours at a time. And it's only when they perhaps receive their next phone bill from the carrier that they really see what's been going on. So that fraud's been around forever, and it's still around. So it's been going
And
on.
what is very interesting about that is that, yes, it's a very old scheme, but it keeps on. So they managed to twist it in a way that, one, it extends to different service, telecommunication services, SMS. They managed to twist it to extend it to other parties impacted. Traditionally, it's mainly the operators that have been impacted by these, and the businesses that were using PBXs, branches from the operators. But right now, in a slightly different way, the same schemes work for the enterprises, for the brands. So they can get, I don't know, any OTT can get abused, any CPAS can get abused. The way the bad guys are going to access the platform itself is going to be different. But what they do with the platform once they got access is exactly the same. Send loads of SMSs, or send loads of calls to make money out of the transactions. That is not the only way anymore. And I think one of the most important changes over the past 5 years, so relatively recent change, is the fact that we are moving from making money out of telecom transactions, be it SMS or voice, to making money by abusing directly the end users, so focusing on the end users to obtain personal data. That is the biggest, for me, the biggest change in the whole thing.
It's becoming something focused, really impacting individuals, and they're taking advantage of a lot of the uncertainty and the worry that's been around the past couple of years.
And that has a lot of consequences. So
yeah, real life consequences far beyond just the pure financial. Tim, I'd like to come to you. So I'm just checking his name. Mark Parker was on earlier on, another Yorkshireman from Leeds. He was on the session looking at monetization in IoT. And I remember he mentioned today about the fact that, okay, you've got security, but if security costs money, then do you know what? There's a temptation not to be as secure. So what are you seeing from the financial aspect? There are two elements to this, because being secure, having a firewall, most importantly, having a managed service to go with it, costs money. So is it really worth it? And I'm talking about millions of organizations out there, smaller enterprises as well. Is it really worth it for them to invest in the security side of things compared to the money they could lose from fraud? That's number one. Is it worth investing? But secondly, there's been a huge increase. If we've talked about this before, for example, with SMS, increasing SMS prices in the world, and that is actually encouraging, shall I say, a rather large number of people, organizations, to get involved with the grey area of the market who might never have got involved with that before. So there are financial pressures at both ends.
I think your question is very broad in there, but I think
it is.
One aspect of this is should you invest, and what's that return on that investment? To put it at a really basic level, we're all trying to get rid of fraud, but can I afford to get rid of fraud? And I think the most important thing to recognise is the spectrum of solutions that are available, and how some actually of the simplest solutions can actually be very, very effective. I mean, we still see today, if just looking at caller ID, just looking at the A number that comes through on a number, there are some of our customers who just do a very basic validation. Does it exist? Does it actually belong to an operator? Make sure it's not a premium rate number for an international call? Okay, two really simple questions. Quite difficult to maintain the data at a global level to be able to answer that question. But in terms of the mechanics of doing it and the cost to whoever it is that's doing that check, actually that can be very, very straightforward, and a very simple, basic thing that eliminates a surprising amount of fraud. So, statistically, we see over 10% of that particular application where they will see invalid caller IDs. Now, a lot of those are just because they've not been correctly configured, or they are not being handled correctly by the network. However, to be able to then get down to the point of saying, well, is this a good one or is it a bad one? The first thing you've got to do is eliminate all the accidents, all just the incorrect configurations. So whilst that 10% is a very big figure, we're then still seeing probably 1 in 10 of those. So we're now down to about 1% are actually intentional misrepresentations of a caller ID.
Yeah.
And that's being eliminated without any clever intelligence or artificial intelligence or smart rules or anything. Very, very simple rules and very simple information. So I think that's a thing that has to be recognized. There are basic things that can be done that make a huge difference.
Fantastic, Tim. So simplicity. Dmitry, moving on to you. I'm sure you're going to continue on into the voice side of things, leading on from what Tim said. Do you agree there are some really simple aspects to voice security? Because voice underpins so much of what we as individuals do and how businesses interact with us today still, and will still be important in years to come. Is simplicity key, and what do we need to do to educate individuals that we're not doing, that you're seeing?
Okay, yeah, so I think, yes, there are some basic principles that needs to be applied. So basically that works for both voice and SMS, because we have also recently started working with the SMS traffic, and we do see a lot of similar trends there, as Katia has mentioned. So I think, yes, there are very simple basic principles that need to be implemented. And one of them is that, yes, of course, there are some kind of problems that are here right now. So like there's a fraud scheme we are fighting with, but you must really think beyond that. So not just how I beat this scheme, because it will be another scheme tomorrow. You must think more globally. So how do I prevent this type of manipulation of this type of traffic? So once you start thinking a bit bigger, while start thinking in these big categories, you can quicker eliminate some future schemes, of course. And yes, I think also there's, when I'm speaking about education, there's not also the need to educate end customers, because, well, that's actually quite straightforward. So you know the fraud schemes which are hitting them, you just, well, basically tell them what is safe to do and what is not. Also, I think what is overlooked sometimes is the need to educate your peers. So if you're an operator and you find a really efficient way to deal with some problem, basically you are interested to share this knowledge with your peers, with the other operators, maybe propose that through an industry working group, because of course, once the industry on the whole becomes a safer place, you will also benefit from that. So that's possibility to work together in real time to enrich each other with this knowledge. I think that's one of the critical.
I agree.
The peers missing right now.
Fantastic. Yeah, the peers, and also we've seen governments and other related organizations as well need educating, because I've seen personally examples where councils here in the UK, so local authorities, go out and tell people, hey, if you see an SMS coming from, and they actually give the originator, they provide the information. If you see an SMS coming from this number or with this text at the top of it, the header, then it's safe. And it's like, by doing that, you're actually telling the fraudsters how exactly they can manipulate an SMS to make it look genuine and actually be interacted with by the consumer. Katia, it pains me to say, but we're coming to the close of this session. Your final closing remarks, and if you're wanting to put your hat on as well, talking from the GLF, what do we combined as an industry, between associations, etc., need to do? And do you agree actually that we are doing enough to educate the end users?
GLF and i3 Forum, I have to say.
Sorry, GLF and i3 Forum as well. Yes.
Difficult question, actually. I think collaboration is the key. Collaboration at large, and collaboration is not only, uniting around GLF or i3 Forum or MEF or GSMA. I mean, there are so many organizations, and that's a little bit of the issue. There has to be much more. Each organization is focused on some specifics, but we need to come together, because the whole industry is an ecosystem, and each of these specific groups needs to get to a point that we coordinate our activities and our efforts. And in this ecosystem, we also have the regulators. And regulators by nature, they tend to focus on their own countries, their own area of interest. But right now, fraud is international. And fraud requires really an international coordination.
Mhm.
And I think also in the previous session, we've been talking about the regulators' role. They somehow, I know this is complicated, but everything is complicated. Just need to find the right way to do it. But at some point, there has to be some kind of coordination. It doesn't make sense right now for fraud in the international space to have different regulations obliging or enforcing rules for the national parties and forgetting to, to provide a solution, a process for the international space, because that is what links them all. And in the education space, I don't think we are there yet. Even in that space, I would still keep us at 5-ish.
Okay.
We have a lot to do.
Thank you, Katia. Nilay, come to you for closing remarks. You're going to end this, and it's a difficult one. I'm going to ask you a super difficult question. I have a magic wand here. I give it to you. You have one thing you can do for any stakeholder, whether it be technology or anything. The most important thing that if you could make it so immediately around the world to stop telecoms fraud in its tracks, what would you do?
That's a very tough question, James, and I'm definitely not a magician at all. So,
No, but if I am, I've given you the solution. You can have anything you want. One thing.
Thank you. That's a great wish to have. But okay, so let me put it this way: that see, there are technologies which definitely exist, and which can and let's be kind of also be realistic, James. As a closing remark, I would say that see, fraud, it's impossible to bring it to zero. Let's be very realistic about it. All that we are all in fact doing collectively is that we are increasing the cost of doing fraud. We are raising the barriers for the fraudsters to kind of do fraud. So somebody who could be sitting in one remote part of the world with a single laptop and earning millions of dollars through fraud, we're going to make it a little more difficult, where he has to probably have a set of machines and buy some more sophisticated software. That is what we're typically doing. And the second part of kind of really doing this piece is that and to be brutally honest, is that there is also a conflict of interest, because there is something which we've not really addressed head on. But let me put it this way: that frauds erode your top lines, right? So on one hand, you have this undaunting task of trying to stop fraud. On the other hand, you have this KPIs to meet. So which one would you choose? So there is a very delicate balance which lies between the two. Okay, so that is something which is also one of the, I would say, impediments of trying to stop fraud. So that is a very realistic picture. But I think, as Katia mentioned, and I think what all of us believe, that collaboration, and I would probably add to it awareness, I think is another part, and acceptance, because a lot of us are still in a state of denial. We think that it's probably happening to our neighbor. It's not going to happen to us. So till the time it really hits you, where the fraudsters take away your, steal your customers' privacy data and all that stuff, and hold you to ransom and ask you to pay in cryptocurrency to get your own data back, till that time we are still in a state of denial. So I think, as probably somebody has said, it's not whether you have been hacked, it's only when you are going to be hacked.
And even more so, if you're a private individual, you've had your identity stolen, and oh my gosh, the pain and misery you've got to go through with all the various companies to prove, actually, no, it really is James Williams. It really is. It's not Tim Ward. There we go.
That's
Sorry,
right.
Tim. There we go. Anyway, we have overrun massively, but there was so much to talk about. I'd like to thank my speakers today. Dmitry, thank you so much. Nilay, thank you for joining us so late from India. I appreciate that, because it's a late evening with you. Tim and Katia as well. So that's it from this session, and join me to introduce the final session coming up in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much all. Bye for now.
Thank you very much.